H-I-J-K.
Auth knows his alphabet. Yeah, yes, that's yeah. Apparently, he can do the ABCs.
About all I can accomplish these days.
Good luck.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lat Mackey, and this is Sequence Break, episode 32, Author Blues. And here he is, the one, the only Author Blues. Auth, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. That I feel like your introduction oversold me.
Well, I mean, you are
the unrivaled, the Author Blues.
the magnificent. Yes, we can go on that.
Please stop. No, keep going.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time and joining on the podcast. I basically just want to talk to you about everything, but I know that we only have a certain amount of time, so I appreciate you taking the time. And I'm trying to think of when I first became familiar or first saw an appearance of you, and it must be a GDQ couch somewhere, because I was looking back and I'm trying to think, when was the first GDQ event you attended?
My very first one was AGDQ 2015, if I'm not mistaken. I wasn't running anything. I didn't really know anybody at the time, but I had been running Super Mario World and thought that I would go and see what the event was like, and I haven't missed one since. So
one thing I love so I started watching GDQs in the 14 and 15, right around that area, and it only looks like there's 3 rows of chairs set up, so you can see the entire audience perfectly, it's all in frame and everything, so it's easy to spot people and stuff like that, so it's pretty cool. We'll get into some of that just a little bit later, but that's pretty cool. So we've been doing this for a while. Let's first start, before we get into everything, so for those of you who aren't quite familiar with Author Blues, basically, if you tune into his stream, you could be watching any game at any time. I would say that if you want some real fun, go ahead and load up your speedrun.com profile. It actually takes the servers a few minutes to load your profile with all the games that you've run and stuff like that. But before we get to that, it's massive, man. Why don't you take us back a little bit? When did you when was your first experience with video games? When did you start playing games and stuff like that?
So I started playing when I was really young. My dad was into video games as well, at least off and on. I wouldn't necessarily have described him as an avid video gamer, but he enjoyed playing them as well. When I was particularly young, my family got a Super Nintendo. My dad was kind of a technophile, got a computer way before it was common to own computers, things like that. And so when the Super Nintendo came out, he got one. And he and my mom used to love to play Super Mario World. So I had the Super Nintendo in my room, but growing up, it would basically be a race to who could get home first to play it. I'd get off the bus, mid-afternoon, and if my dad got off work early, he'd already be sitting in my room playing A Link to the Past or something like that.
Dude, that's brutal. It's bad enough having to compete with siblings, but parents as well. Oh my gosh, dude.
Well, it was probably for the best that he was playing them too, because at the age I was playing it, I couldn't beat the Ice Palace in A Link to the Past. I had to get him to play it for me. So I probably had some experience before that. My grandmother owned an NES and a Game Boy because she was a big fan of Tetris. So I was probably exposed to it even younger than that, but my formative memories are from the Super Nintendo.
Tetris on the Game Boy comes up quite often on this podcast. My parents, I found them late at night once I woke up in the middle of the night, and they were both, competing against each other playing Tetrises on our Game Boys.
Very nice.
Any experience or with consoles that weren't Nintendo or one of the mainstream consoles? Because
actually, no.
Okay.
I was a Nintendo kid growing up. My only experience outside of the bubble of Nintendo was when I got a little bit older, I traded in my original DMG Game Boy for a Game Gear from a local game shop. Huge mistake. One of my greatest regrets.
Did that feel like an upgrade?
Well, I think I thought it was going to be an upgrade, high color,
right.
Backlit screen, and the batteries last all of 20 minutes. I got to experience some games that I probably wouldn't have otherwise. I mean, I had some Sega games, so I was at least aware of those things existing. But really, my memories of gaming outside of Nintendo probably would have been all the PC games that my dad owned. So we had some of the classic adventure games at the time, things like Space Quest and King's Quest. I had those games as a kid. Couldn't make sense of them, but I enjoyed sort of tinkering around in those worlds and seen what I could accomplish, which is not much.
I have this strong affinity for King's Quest, the PC, way back when. But I'm curious. I'm wondering. I don't know if I ever got past like 5 screens in that game. I'm curious. I'm like,
yeah. I'm the same way. I still have great memories of playing Space Quest.
Oh, there you go.
I don't think I saw more than like 3 or 4 screens of that game. I can't imagine that I made any sense of it.
Yeah, it's weird the way nostalgia kind of works. So, for me, it's like I remember playing with my brothers and stuff like that. But my older brother he was 3 years older than me, so he had some skills and stuff, and he was really smart. But I can't imagine. I don't think we ever got past like maybe more than 20 minutes of the game. But it just seemed amazing, this whole world, that the game offered.
Exactly. Yeah, I had Myst as well. Right. I had Myst as a kid on the CD-ROMs. I remember it. Another game that I probably didn't make a whole lot of sense out of, but
I think at this point,
really just enjoyed it.
It's possible I've purchased Myst 5 different times at this point, and I still haven't beat the damn game. That's one of those. It's one of those games, like it's the classics,
I know. I keep telling myself I'm going to go back to it. Like I don't necessarily have like fond memories of Myst, but everyone just tells me, "Oh, you're going to love the game," and I'm like, "Oh, I got to get around to it eventually."
So I'm wondering if you were this. So as a kid, I loved playing a bunch of different games, but I mean, if I think about it, man, I played a lot of Super Mario Brothers 2, 3, and like Mega Man 2, maybe, and Zelda and Zelda 1 and 2. I'm curious if you were would you feel yourself like continuing wanting to play the same games when you were a kid, or were you experimenting with all these different for the variety of, if you had access to the games? A lot of us didn't have access to all these games as well.
I had a very limited number of games that I owned. My grandmother, who owned the NES, she had probably like 5 or 10 games, some obscure games too that I remember fondly that a lot of people don't have experience with. Games like Kiwi Craze, or exactly, yeah.
I've never heard of
some
that.
People know by the name of New Zealand Story. I had Deja Vu. I played that as a kid, which is probably not a game that's great for kids. Goonies 2. Just like a lot of games that fell outside of the really mainstream bubble, but I thought that they were really cool as a kid. I played SMB 1, I played SMB 3, I played SMB 2. Right. I had those games and I played them, but I don't think I fully appreciated them as a kid. Like I'd play through the route with the warps in SMB 1, and I'd see like none of the game, and I'd die on World 8 and give up.
Yes, just get destroyed. So as you're growing up and things like that, I'm curious, like when's like your first experience with a speedrun? How did that whole world? How'd you get into that world?
So I kind of credit my genesis of speedrunning to 2 specific things. One of them is I used to always get a really hard time from my parents because they swore they would stop buying me video games because I beat them too quickly. They would always give me a hard time about, why should we pay $70-$80 for a video game if you're just going to finish it in a weekend?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why my family didn't own a lot of video games. Like I didn't get a lot of video games purchased for me. And so instead, my dad was in the Navy. And so when he would be back to shore from being out to sea, he would always he'd be home for a few weeks. And so he would go to the Blockbuster and he'd rent a few movies for him and mom to watch. And he'd rent me a video game for the weekend. And so I would get a video game for a 2-day rental. I mean, if you want to see the game, you got to play as fast as possible. Right? Like you have to put the time in. Right. You have to put the effort in. You have to figure out how to get good at it if you want to see past level 2 in a weekend.
Right.
So I consider that to be, maybe not in any official capacity, but I see that as being a way that I was born into speedrunning in that way.
That's such a good approach, because so I rented a lot of games because we didn't own too many, and it was all about I had to go rent it 4 different times just to beat the game if I wanted to beat a game. So that's actually really I should have thought about just getting through it faster.
Exactly.
That's such a good
yeah. I'd rent Aladdin, and I have to be good at it if I'm going to finish it in the 2 days before I have to take it back. Or if I got an RPG or something like that, if I want to see half the game, I've got to put the 20 hours in over the course of the weekend.
Dude, that's so smart. Man, I wish I would have had that kind of foresight. But then again, I still to this day, I've struggled with actually being good at any game. So it's like, I can totally understand that perspective. Can you first remember maybe a speedrun that maybe you experienced or watched or saw that might have been more timed and what our traditional idea is of a speed run?
That's tough. So I think that I wasn't really aware of speedrunning for a very long time. I know that Awesome Games Done Quick and Classic Games Done Quick started, a lot of people have experience either watching it or even participating in it for years before I was even aware that it existed. Really, I think my first formal introduction to speedrunning outside of like the random, before YouTube, but videos that would circulate, and you'd see, the SMB3 tasks and not know what a task even is, or something like that. But I think my first introduction to it, and what really actually ended up getting me into speedrunning, was the summer of Super Mario 64 that Siglemic did. So in August of 2013, he spent an entire month doing 12-hour streams every single day, trying to grind to get the world record. And it was just such a captivating event on the internet. Like, everyone was watching it. There was, I mean, Twitch didn't have the broad appeal that it did necessarily at the time. And so like that was the captivating thing on Twitch at the time. And I watched it, and I was fascinated by it, and I was invested in it. And he ended up succeeding. He got the world record partway through. And at the end of it, I walked away saying, if I put that kind of time into something, I'm sure that I could get good at video games too. I already considered myself to be at least above average at video games. I figured, I love Super Mario World. I bet that if I put a lot of time into Super Mario World, I could get good at that game too.
I wasn't watching speedruns at the time when he was going for that grind, but it seems like one of those, like your point, like one of those moments for the speedrunning community, because this was like seeing the grind real time. And if I remember correctly, like he doesn't commentate a lot during those streams, right? It was mostly gameplay during all that stuff. So that
he didn't have a webcam. There was no hand cams. Right. He did very little commentary. His splits were really just a window capture of a spreadsheet where he was jotting down times as he would go through. It was so low production, but it was him focused on a task, trying to be the best at something. And I think it was really compelling. It was compelling seeing what could happen with hard work and dedication. I didn't at the time think I could ever see myself doing 12-hour streams every single day for a whole month. I still can't imagine doing something like that. But like seeing someone so single-mindedly focused on a task was, I think, really compelling. And I've heard from a lot of speedrunners that was a turning point for them, like saying, I can get in on this. I can do speedrunning.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because that's something that's actually come up quite a bit, where speedrunning it seems even at the highest levels, it becomes a lot about, the amount of time that you put into it, as opposed to being, I'm naturally gifted at making Mario move this way,
There's a quote that really stuck with me one time. I was watching Grand Pooh Bear, and he was talking about speedrunning, the Kaizo hacks that he does. And he has a quote that has burned itself into my brain ever since. He said, I may not be able to play better than someone else, but I can work harder than someone else. And I thought that was such a compelling argument, because it's so easy as a speedrunner to see people around you. There are some real greats in our community. There's people, I could rattle off a list of names of people who will pick up a game one day and in a week be able to produce, if not world record caliber times, just because they have a true gift for being able to study and practice and become better at something. And it can be very difficult to see something like that and not feel sort of just despondent about it. Like, I'm never going to be that good. I'm never going to be able to accomplish what they do. But it's not necessarily just a question of, are you better at learning? Are you better at practice? Are you more diligent? It also is a function of time. Those people might put a week or a month into the game. If I put a year into it, I bet I can get to the same spot. And maybe that hurts to feel like. Maybe it hurts to feel like you have to put that amount of work in. But I mean, I know that I'm capable of putting the effort in if I really feel strongly about it.
I think that's kind of cool too, is that there are, depending in the speedrunning community, there are these niches. Some people just really enjoy grinding out one game, and that's the thing that they do. And it's cool that that's available, because there's also, you and myself, we like playing 8,000 games, so we want to put time into all these different things,
Sure.
And that's the great thing about speedrunning, is that it's not any one thing. You can explore these different avenues and stuff like that.
There's a lot out there. There's a lot to appreciate.
So what was the first speedrun that you submitted a time to, or that recorded a video of? Like, what was kind of your first attempts at speedrunning, if you know, like what game?
Super Mario World. Super Mario World. It was a game I was passionate about. It felt easy to get into. This was when SRL was still incredibly in vogue, Speedruns Live, and so everyone was racing all the time, and Super Mario World had a really avid racing community. So, I learned the first few worlds. I felt empowered to continue working on it. I had friends who were picking up the game at the same time. Some of those friends still speedrunners to this day, still close friends of mine, 7 years later. And it felt good to sort of come up in that community. I submitted times for the shorter categories. I learned the longer categories and submitted times for those. It was really my first serious investment into speedrunning, and probably maybe with the exception of like A Link to the Past, it might be the game I've still invested the most speedrunning time into.
If you don't mind me asking, did you explore any of the hacks or some of the the Super Mario World community is so, I mean, if you look up the categories, it's 8 gajillion categories at this moment, but did you explore any of the hacks or anything at that time as well?
Pretty early on, I speedran. I was the first person to speedrun one of the hacks called Return to Dinosaur Land, which is probably one of the few like truly vanilla standard hacks. It's the same
hack.
difficulty level as the original game. It's one of my favorites. I have played like Kaizo hacks, and I love that there's a community that's built around those. People speedrunning the super hard Kaizo hacks, the challenge hacks, things like that. But for me, I've always been mostly focused on the original game. And I think the reason for that is multifaceted. I think Kaizo games tend to sort of shoehorn you into trying to solve problems their way. One of the things I love about speedrunning is finding inventive ways to solve problems. And so hacks or the base game, the original Super Mario World, and even hacks like Return to Dinosaur Land really give you a lot of opportunity to figure things out your own way.
Return to Dinosaur Land was my first Mario World hack that I ever played, and I couldn't figure out. I actually used your playthrough of it, or maybe it was a speedrun of it, because there's a spot where you get up in the ceiling and you can't see your character as you're trying to jump through the things, and I could not figure out the right path. It was driving me, and I spent like 2 hours on it. So I'm like, at this point, okay, I'm going to the internet. Who's done a run? Hey, authorblues has done a run. Thank you very much for getting me through the game. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
This is pretty cool too. Jericho in the chat says you're the reason that he's aware of speedrunning. Huge world open up in terms of entertainment, and yeah, that's another thing. And there are many different avenues when you start speedrunning and things like that. So very cool. You also, if you don't mind me asking, I didn't put this on the questions, but have you done some time working on the randomizer as part of Super Mario World as well, or a randomizer?
Yeah, I created the randomizer. Me and Kaizuman worked together on it. Kaizuman is probably one of the most brilliant SMW hackers in the community. He knows more about Super Mario World than I know about anything else, literally anything else. He knows more about Super Mario World. So, when I first got started into wanting to make a randomizer for Super Mario World, I was kind of poking around, seeing who had the knowledge to help me. Super Mario World is a very well-documented ROM, but I'm notoriously stupid. And so I really needed someone to carry me a little bit. And so Kaizuman graciously agreed to help me with it, and it was a great partnership. I really got to know him really well, and the randomizer was a lot of fun to make. I've still been tinkering with a version for years now to update it with new features, but it's kind of just a slow burning project.
Nowadays, when I reached early on in the podcast, I had Pidge on. We were talking about the Super Mario RPG randomizer, and it's like a team of like 12 people at this point. So were you? If you don't mind me just going down that rabbit hole a little bit? I mean, were you the one working on the logic? Were you actually doing how do you create something like that to get something? Because the Mario World randomizer is a little bit different than an RPG randomizer. You're not just randomizing where items are and things like that. I'm curious what it was like working on some of that stuff.
So the earliest versions of it was mostly just some dirty patches that Kaizuman wrote to make certain things work, and then just shuffling things around. The randomizer's original goal was just to shuffle the order of stages, maybe change a few things around here and there, like where you pick up power-ups or things like that. It had relatively low ambition initially. In time, we sort of added more and more features, and it became the case where Super Mario World is a very well-documented game, but it's incredibly complicated the way it's built. Just internally, it's a very complicated game structurally. And so the sorts of changes we were able to make, we were sort of running up against those barriers. And so the newest version of the randomizer, which isn't public now, but it does have mostly feature parity with the public version at this point, basically deconstructs the entire game. So the ROM hacking tool that hackers use for Super Mario World, Lunar Magic, it has almost all the same capabilities. So it can completely deconstruct the game and reassemble it. So it's really feature rich, but it's a complicated game to get right. So that's one of the things that stalled me from actually finishing it.
Super interesting. That's actually really cool stuff. Thanks for giving some insight on it, because I'm curious how stuff like that comes about, because it's obvious the community loves the game. So how do you make it new and fresh, and how do you mix up, just a normal playthrough of it?
Part. I think RPGs and games like that lend themselves well to randomizers. I personally play a lot of La Mulana Randomizer, which is sort of a puzzle platformer itself. Those sorts of randomizers typically lean on having to have complicated logic built into them to make sure that the game is still completable. The thing about Super Mario World is, for the most part, if you shuffle it up randomly, it's still always going to be completable. So the complication there isn't with getting the logic right. The complication there is how do you even change Super Mario World, which is itself kind of difficult.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow. I mean, I'm glad it exists. That's the kind of thing. I think it's cool that the community has grasped onto it and runs with it. It's pretty cool. When I've looked through, I was trying to. I typically try to watch as many of the speedruns of whoever is on the podcast as I can. With you, it's just a little bit. But I did notice that it seems like even early on, you were experimenting. While Mario World, you may put the most time in, you were experimenting with different games, even from early on, at least when you started submitting runs. How was that, like a conscious choice, or was that just your approach to video games at the time? I'm curious, like how you went about trying and doing all these different games and stuff.
Yeah, so at the start, when I was doing Super Mario World, I realized that if I played only Super Mario World, I was going to get burnt out really, really quickly. I've always been the sort of person who jumps between things. All of my hobbies, I usually put my hands in a whole bunch of different pots. I always have a bunch of irons in the fire. And with speedrunning, I thought if I just play this one game, I'm going to burn out really quickly. And I decided that I was going to try to use speedrunning initially to beat games that had stumped me as a kid. So if the game was just too hard for me as a kid, I thought now's the opportunity to learn these games and be able to finally, come back and be able to beat them. And ironically, I mentioned Kiwi Craze earlier. That was probably my first one. That was probably one of the first games that I said, this game stumped me as a kid. I could not get through it. It's a brutally difficult game. And so I decided to learn it as a speedrun. And once I had done that, like a door had opened at that point. I realized, I can do this for any game if I want to. I don't have to invest years into it. I don't have to spend a ton of time. I can just learn a game, do whatever run I feel like, and I can move on from it. And that kind of really changed things for me. From then on, it became just an opportunity to find games that I had missed out on, whether it be because they were Japanese games that never came to the US, or because I just didn't have it growing up, or I didn't access it, or I didn't have the right console, or something like that. It was sort of just an experiment in experiencing more games.
I'm curious what makes you stick with a game. So just as a quick example, Epic Ninja Monkey's in the chat, and he's trying to get me to speedrun Darkwing Duck on the TurboGrafx 16. Personally, it's not the most fun game for me to play. The little bit of time I've spent with it. What makes you decide, or why stick with a game that others may consider the gameplay itself a little bit of a struggle to get through?
Maybe that's not the answer you're looking for, but I'm a strong advocate for dropping a game when you're not having fun with it anymore.
And I totally do that. That's exactly it.
Yeah, so for me, it's a question of what makes it fun still. Are you still enjoying just playing the game? I've definitely run games where I don't have a lot of potential to continue improving my time, but I just like playing it. Or I've run games because I haven't gotten quite the time that I want to yet, or I've gotten maybe someone is challenging a world record of mine and I want to improve it so that I can add some space to it. Or maybe I'm the only person running it and I have set my goal at, I want to get, under this time and I just haven't gotten there yet. I have invented many ways to compel myself to play games more. But for the most part, I think the answer quite simply is if you feel like you're done with the game, you're probably done with the game. I mean, back when I was speedrunning a lot more commonly, and I was learning games frequently, and I was playing as many speedruns as I could. My tell was usually if I go live one night with playing some game and I'm dreading it, that's probably the last stream of that game. Right? If it's time to go live and I'm like, I don't really want to play this game anymore, that's probably the last one.
That's such good advice. Epic, by the way, I know you were just kidding. I'm just putting you on the spot because you've recommended some really great games to play actually over the past. You were probably one of the first streamers I started watching when I discovered speedruns. And even though I don't know if you say there's something that was on your profile, I don't know if it's still there, but it was about, you play what you want. I thought, man, that's like, I know that sounds so simple, but that's actually a really good approach to any sort of speedrunning. If it's not fun anymore, don't do it. Like, because this is supposed to be fun.
I think there's also a big problem with speedrunning specifically where, you look at the greats in speedrunning. You look at the people who just have made a real name for themselves in their specific communities. You've got ZFG with Ocarina of Time. You've got Siglemic with Super Mario 64. You've got people who have become associated with certain games. And I would see them branch out or do something else interesting. And all you hear from people is, well, when are you going to play this game again? Like, when are you going back? Because and that's not... like, viewers haven't done anything wrong.
No.
They are following streamers who are playing a game that they're really passionate about. If ZFG plays something else, people are going to ask, okay, when are you playing Ocarina of Time again? Because they want to watch Ocarina of Time. And so I really wanted to set the standard really early on for me that if you ask me when I'm going to play a game again, my answer is going to be, I don't know. It might be tomorrow. It might be never again. I can't promise anything because I'm really just going to play whatever I'm excited about.
That's actually a really important point, I think, too. So when I was working for Mitch as his editor, when he wasn't playing SMB3, the viewership was in half. And at first that bugged him, but after a while, you're like, wait a minute, I'm doing this for myself. I need to take the headspace. And so I guess it's a good example of it's okay sometimes taking those, doing those things that may do that. It's especially if you're doing this every single day, which we'll get into in a little bit, but the full-time grind can affect you mentally and things like that. So it's good to
I think it's also important to understand that when you do that, when you change games and your viewership cuts in half, that's sort of part of the process of cultivating a following that's there for you rather than just the game. I don't think that there's anything wrong with people who are there to watch a game. I'm certain that when I play certain games that I play frequently, there are people who are there because I'm playing the game they want to see. And that's fine. They're welcome to be there. But when you change games frequently, I think it starts to establish which people are there because they're interested in your content, not necessarily just the game that you're playing. And I think that can be healthy in certain regards. When I played more and more different types of speedruns, and then eventually, more recently have branched outside of speedrunning, I've never once felt like there's been any serious pressure for me to play any specific game. Like I don't feel that way anymore. And I think that's because my following has become accustomed to me playing whatever I feel like on any random day. And that is the normal now. And I'm very fortunate to be in that position, but I think that is a healthy mindset to work toward, is that it's not that your viewership has gone in half. It's just that the people who are there for a specific thing are not there today. The rest of the people who are here for you.
Absolutely. And I do want to talk a little bit more about the streaming aspect of speedrunning, but I'd be remiss to ask a few questions about some of the games that you've run over the past. Sure. So Bubsy being one of them, that comes up a lot. How did you discover that game? Where did that run even start from? Like, how did you find that game in your life?
That's hard to answer. I think that in the process of playing a lot of random games, I came across some games that were traditionally considered bad, and I think I just sort of embraced the stereotype that was forming that I was known for bad games. It was sort of in the heyday of the transitionary period where GDQs were starting to emphasize the awful block and the silly block and the WTF Japan block. Anyone who remembers that one, there were all these blocks that would really emphasize people who were playing the non-traditional games. And I had started to build this reputation, I guess I would say, in the speedrunning community as the person who would speedrun really anything. As for Bubsy in particular, I actually had a lot of fondness for Bubsy from my childhood because Bubsy was one of those games that I rented a lot as a kid. I played Bubsy 1 for the Super Nintendo. Obviously didn't get very far in it, but I played it a lot, and I really actually quite liked it, and still do. It's not an ironic love I have for that game. I truly do love Bubsy.
Yeah, it looks like you enjoy it when you play. That's the thing.
It's not a bit. It's not a bit. But I think that I sort of just leaned into it a lot more as I became somewhat more popular as a streamer and a speedrunner is that, you know, I can take a bad game and I can make it a fun speedrun. And I thought that that was really cool. I thought it was cool being able to bring attention to games people had never heard of, to be able to bring attention to what makes, you know, a bad game a good speedrun. I loved that my niche I was carving out was not necessarily being the best speedrunner, but just kind of, you know, being able to have fun with it.
Well, and as a viewer, like some of the things I noticed, like I never know what game I'm going to be watching when I turn on your stream. So like I love playing all these different types of video games. So like seeing one, like, oh man, that looks like a great game that I might want to give a try. Bubsy is not one of those, but I'm just saying that at some point. No, I'm just kidding. It's fun to watch though. It's really fun. All the different variants and things like that. I did one thing. I didn't. When was that? What was the first game that you ever submitted and or got into a GDQ? I don't think I researched that.
I submitted a lot of games over the years. I mean, usually I would again lean into sort of the unconventional, unpopular games. I think maybe it was a confidence issue. I never felt confident in submitting some of the more popular games that I was in on. You know, I figured there's probably someone better than me who can submit Super Mario World. There's probably someone better than me who can submit A Link to the Past. So I kind of leaned in on what I bring to the table is that I play strange games. And I submitted a lot of different bad games over the years. The first one that ever got in was AGDQ 2017, I think. I submitted Rocky and Bullwinkle and got it in for the NES. So at this point, was this before or after Cuso Grande started? Cuso Grande has been going for quite a while. The Bad Games Mystery Tournament.
Had Bro on, and I can't remember what the first year was. It's escaping me. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, it's fine. But so it was sort of in that same era where there was this like community starting to form around bad video games. And I think now when you look at like AGDQ's Bad Games block, you can see that community. You know, it's the same rotation of people on couches and playing games. We're all friends. We all know each other. Cuso Grande brings us together. Big Bad Game-a-thon brings us together. The Awful block brings us together. And like there's this very real bad video games community that has formed now. You know, we know each other, we're sharing games, we're talking about, you know, if I see some weird DOS game, I'm probably going to go tell Liz Starr or Corndam, you know, you got to check this game out. Like this is way up your alley. And if someone sees some terrible game that they see on the Super Nintendo or something like that, they're going to come and bring it to me. And it's just sort of this feedback reinforcement loop. So
I gotta be honest, one of my favorite GDQ moments of all time is the Titanic playthrough. And I you know, as much as I love Brosench's voices, I love your playthrough of it, I'm wondering how the hell did you even discover or find that game in the first place to do?
I found it from Cuso Grande. Cuso Grande. It was a game that I had to race on Cuso Grande, and I was like, this game is amazing. I love it. It's so strange. It's so bizarre. I latched onto it almost immediately. For a lot of the bad games you've seen from me, at least in the last 3 years, the answer is almost always Cuso Grande. I either saw it on Cuso Grande or I was subjected to it on Cuso Grande.
Glitchcat7 in the chat says, awful block at 5 a.m. AGDQ 2017 was one of his favorite moments at his first GDQ. But I think that's also one of the things that makes it so memorable. It's quite often it's at the middle of the night. I mean, most recently it was really late. I was almost like the morning by the time 2020 awful block happened. And I totally agree with that.
They've been gracious to give us what feels like a larger and larger platform. Usually at this point now, it seems like it stretches usually from like 10 or 11 at night all the way through till, you know, the late morning, which is great. And I think that there is some credence there. I think there's some logic to the idea that the loopiness that you get at that hour of the morning does seem to make things stand out a little more, makes things funnier. I think that all of us would love to see a primetime awful block just because it is a highlight for so many people. But I think what we do is a huge service to Games Done Quick as it is. The late night graveyard shifts are always lower viewership in the programming, and so being able to put something that's so well loved, so well received in the middle of the night, I think does a lot of favors for Games Done Quick. So
Totally agree. And Sharfer says that it's always Cusagrande where you find the awful game. So that's fair. There's such a variety. I mean, every match is a different game. So it's pretty cool. One of the things that I have always appreciated about your GDQ appearances is quite often I see you on the couch and you're talking through a game, and there are so many of we have a wonderful cast of commentators within our community. Skybills, Blecky, all these people come to mind. Glitchcat, actually, all these people who are able to speak through the game very clearly, but make it understandable for me at home, who's never seen this game in my entire life. Is that something you had to practice, or why do you think that comes so naturally to you? Because it seems very natural when you're doing it on stream.
Well, if this podcast has been any indication, I just love to talk, so that certainly helps. But I think it is a skill that you learn, and I think part of being good as a couch commentator, I do not think that all of my couch commentary sessions have been good. I think that there are some real gems in there where I've done my best work, and there's sometimes I just sit on a couch and I'll crack wise once or twice during a run, and I think being good on a GDQ couch is about figuring out what's being asked of you. I look at people like Mythical 9 and Blecky, who will for weeks or even a month up to a run will like plan with the runner, trying to make sure that their commentary is exactly what they want it to be. Mythical 9 puts so much work into being the best possible commentator for my runs. I mean, it's unbelievable how much effort he put into. I've never put that much effort into any couch commentary as he has. And it was just for a random game. It was for Sword of the Black Stone, a terrible PC game in Awful Block, but he was passionate about it. And I think part of being a good couch commentator is figuring out what's going to fit the run best. I've been on couches where I'm the expert on the game. Super Mario World, whenever I couch for that game, I know about as much as any person does about Super Mario World. I am one of the people who I would consider to be an expert on that game, at least for the vanilla game. I've been on couches where I'm just there to crack jokes. When I show up for an Awful Games block, I'm just gonna riff off of the runner. They make a joke, I'm gonna make a joke with them. If something funny happens or if something wild happens, I'm gonna pull some crazy face, or I'm gonna make some loud noise, or I'm gonna make a joke about it. I'm just gonna try to enhance the experience. And then there's been runs before where people ask me, will you be on my couch? I say, is it okay that I know nothing about the game? And they say, yeah, that's fine. And I'll come there and I will be the voice for the person at home. Can you explain to me what we're looking at right now? I don't understand what just happened. It looked incredible. Can you tell me what it was we just saw? And I think that also is an underdeveloped skill for a lot of people, is knowing, you have a question inside your head, and instead of just saying, wow, I wish I understood that, just ask. Just ask the question. On the couch, that is perfectly fine commentary. If you show up on a couch and you ask the questions that the person at home is probably asking, that makes good commentary.
One of the things that so often speedrunners make these really incredible things look so easy, and they've done it 1,000 times, so they won't think about it to mention that like it's this big deal. And I've learned after watching Zallard for so often do these really incredible things, he's always talking about how difficult these things are and how this shouldn't work and how this shouldn't happen. And it's great for entertainment value, but it also creates an understanding for me watching at home why this thing is so amazing that you're doing.
Exactly. Yeah, I think couch commentary is I think in large part, especially if you're the expert on the game, there's a real balance to be struck between making things sound impressive by making them sound difficult, and also making things sound accessible, because you don't want to make it sound like, oh, everything that's happening here is easy, like you could learn this is nonsense, because then that downplays the amazing skill that these runners have. But at the same time, if you say this is so hard, like the person that's doing this is obviously of an ungodly skill level that we can only hope to ever attain, then future people coming and watching that will say, I think speedrunning is probably too hard for me to get into. I'm never going to be able to be at the level of skill that these people have. Let me be the first, perhaps, to be on the record of saying I don't consider myself to be the best video gamer. I don't. I think that I'm above average at best. I think that I have good reasoning and problem solving skills. I don't think I'm the best speedrunner in the world. And I think that it's important to show people that it's really just a function of time. If you put as much time into Super Mario World as I put into Super Mario World, you will beat my time. I promise that. If you put the number of hours I put in, you will beat my time. Do you want to put in that many hours? Maybe not. Maybe you want to put in half as many. Maybe you'll get to my time. But But the important thing to understand is that it simultaneously can be true that what people are watching is impressive and it is attainable.
Absolutely. Another good comment from the chat. Everybody can Strider, you know? That's a very good point.
It's true.
If you're watching the video of this, I picked a couple of different of your live performances to show on stream and during the video. And right now you're looking at The Adventure of Cooking Cream, one of my favorite speedruns you've done. Co-op with Sky at Calithon 2019, 18, one of those. And so,
yeah. 18, I think.
18. Okay. Some of the other ones I've shown were the obviously the Titanic one, but also the first one we did was the co-op. I guess I don't know if you'd call it co-op with Lack Attack at where you guys did the 2-player 1 mind. Is that what is it? What do I call that? I can't remember now.
Yeah. The hack is just referred to as one mind. It's it's a 1-player 2-controller hack where we both are controlling the player simultaneously. So. It basically oscillates back and forth between whose controller has control over the character.
Right.
And so it's referred to as one mind because if the 2 players have exactly the same strats, if they're of one mind, then there shouldn't be any problems. But the problem is that everyone speedruns very slightly differently, and that's what makes it challenging.
It's one of the coolest and most interesting runs I've ever seen of a Mario World hack. And I did you get a chance? I'm curious if you know anything about the backstory. Like, do you know like how that even when did you discover that game? Because it's super fascinating the way that the hack works.
So that hack was made by Dots Are Cool, who has just undergone a name change. So I don't remember what his username is now, but Dots Are Cool made it. He's always been known for making really interesting hacks on Super Mario World that aren't like, here's brand new levels and brand new enemies, but here's Super Mario World played in a different way. He's done a number of different things, and it was just an idea he had, and it executed so perfectly that actually a number of other games have done it now too. Kaizo Man made a hack for me of One Mind: A Link to the Past to do the same thing. So I mean, it's an idea that translates to other games, but Dots envisioned the idea first with Super Mario World. I don't know if he got the idea from anywhere else. Oh, Freeze is his new name. Thank you. And it worked so well, and I think it's become a pretty well-known staple of the sort of esoteric SMW hacks now.
Well, you mentioned the Link to the Past, that that is available, that function or that gameplay element is available. But Link to the Past, that's a whole different animal. That's
Exactly.
I mean, enemies show up and move in random patterns and things. Oh my God.
Yeah, I think it works well for any game where there's not just one way to solve a problem. You can solve a problem a number of different ways, and that doesn't mean that like there isn't a right way to solve problems, but everyone plays very slightly differently. And those hacks really kind of draw those out and make them into funny moments. So,
right. Oh, it sounds fascinating. I have to check that out because that sounds so interesting. One of the things is you're a partner streamer. When did you become partner, and when would you consider that you started streaming full time, or as you started putting in the hours into the streaming aspect of this thing?
So I've been partnered for about 3.5 years. At this point, this coming February will be 4 years for me. Ever since I got into speedrunning, I would say that it's been, I would say that I've been something like full time. Okay. It's, for me, my hobbies have always been a escape from like work and other stresses. And so for me, I think at the start, when I very first started streaming, I streamed maybe like 3 or 4 days a week, but probably as of about 2015, I think I've been mostly an everyday streamer. I don't have like a set day off. I just I take a day off if I feel like taking a day off. I mean, I've had periods of time where I'll take a week off. Anytime I go on vacation, like to AGDQ or SGQ, obviously I take a week off. I'm not claiming to have streamed every single day for the past 5 years, but I would say that I've been something like a full-time streamer for about 5 or 6 years then. So
I want to talk more about this, but the chat is bringing up a good point about La Mulana One Mind. When's that going to happen? That sounds like awesome, but awful at the same time.
That sounds terrible. I'm not excited about that idea.
Right. So one of the things you keep a full-time IRL job and do the full-time streaming. I've heard, like, how do you manage doing something like that, and do you sleep? I mean, that's the first question that comes to mind.
I don't sleep as much as I should. I kind of got used to in grad school sleeping for 4 hours a day, so now I've upped it to about 5 or 6.
Wow.
I have made the choice in my life to sacrifice sleep for some other more interesting things. So my IRL job is I'm a college professor, and so the time commitment for that varies wildly, right? So sometimes it's really just sort of a 20-hour-a-week commitment, and then there's times in the semester where it's like a 80-hour-a-week commitment. And so during those times, I might stream a little less, just a 3 or 4 hour stream when I can fit it in. But for the most part, I'm able to fit it in fairly comfortably. I have a comfortable, I have a comfortable life that permits me the ability to focus on other things that I'm interested in.
Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned you have 5 video game projects going at once. Hearing that, and that's kind of your approach to life, it's not surprising that you're able to manage these things all at once. Do you enjoy the college, the aspect of teaching and things like that? And do you ever see any carryover or any things that in real life help you out with speedrunning and streaming or something, but vice versa?
I think being I think having learned to be a public persona, being capable of public speaking helps a lot with being a teacher. I certainly subscribe to the opinion that classrooms should be entertaining, and while I'm sure I don't always succeed at that, I think that the more that you can grab people's attention in a variety of different ways, the more you can accomplish in a classroom. And so I'd say that, I mostly try to translate my joking, fun personality over to the class as much as I can. I have the benefit of being pretty young still, so me being the cut up professor who likes to crack a joke once in a while isn't weird yet. And as far as has being a college professor translated back to streaming, I'd say that I've been able to be more focused and more diligent. I think my job requires me to be able to be really focused and concentrated on certain tasks, and I think that focus has translated into being able to sort of come up with what I want to do with my stream, come up with a plan, and really execute on it well.
Throughout the podcast, but also other speedrunners I know in the community, there's actually a fair amount of teachers among the community. And I've also, there's a fair amount of engineers and software developers and these things. And I'm wondering if there's something about that mindset that tends itself to speedrunning. And I don't know.
I think absolutely.
Is there? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I think absolutely. There's a lot of people who are in tech who are interested in speedrunning. I think that there is a whole conversation to be had about speedrunning's intersection with certain communities. There is a strong bias toward engineering.
Yes.
There's a strong bias towards people who are mathematically minded, be it through music or through engineering or through the sciences. There's a strong bias toward the LGBT community, I think, as well.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think those intersections all are incredibly relevant, and I think that there's sort of interesting discussions to be had about it. I think that the engineering mindset is one of being sort of calculated and focused, being able to sort of put in a plan, execute based on hypotheses, the rigor that's involved with that, the diligence that's involved with that. I think that makes a pronounced difference. I think that people who are mathematically minded tend to be able to understand sort of patterns, and pattern recognition is an important thing in speedrunning as well, especially if you're outside of just running, if you're doing like routing and glitch hunting and things like that. That pattern matching, that pattern oriented mindset is incredibly important. And it's maybe not necessarily my place to speak on it, but I've heard a lot of amazing LGBT voices who have talked about how the speedrunning community has a great appeal because of the concept of sort of like the queering of video games, the idea of taking a video game and in some way subverting it is important and is sort of tied irrevocably to the same concepts that speedrunning and things like that give us.
You're giving me an idea for a podcast episode, because there are so much of these different representations that it's not a coincidence. I mentioned the teacher thing, and your tutorials, GlitchCat's tutorials, like they're people who can articulate their thought process and how to achieve something through there. We have some awesome tutorials out there on all the most popular games, but then also you drill down a little bit. That must lend itself hand in hand as well with the whole
absolutely.
speedrunning thing.
Speedrunning as a community, despite the fact that it is competitive, is also highly cooperative. If I have seen further, it is only by standing on the shoulders of giants. The people who have come before me have laid the groundwork for me to be able to accomplish what I have. Even if it's a brand new game, being able to bring the ideas from other games and the skills that I've learned plays a huge role in that. And so I do think that that lends itself to the same mindset that draws people to become teachers and educators, is the desire to sort of contribute to something that's larger than you. When I teach a student, when I try to impact their life in some way, I'm probably not going to reap the rewards of that. I'm not putting my time into that because I'm necessarily going to get something back. It's a greater mindset of I'm contributing to the overall human community.
Right.
And I think that's similar to what you get in speedrunning, is like the desire to help someone else with runs, to build tutorials. I'm not going to necessarily reap the rewards from that, but it's the good feeling that you get from knowing that you're overall contributing to the greater speedrunning community.
Yeah, those are really good points. These aren't happening by accident. These are there's really interesting observations that it'd be good to explore. I think you're right, and with some extended periods of time, because there's some really interesting crossovers and things happening with that. You mentioned a little bit earlier. I do want to ask about it before we move on, and that's the La Mulana. When did you first play La Mulana, and what's kind of because you continue to play now? It's been years. It seems like you've been playing La Mulana 1 and 2 and the randos and all that kind of stuff. How did you discover that game, or when was the first time, I guess, playing through it?
I've always loved puzzle games. Puzzle games are probably my favorite genre of game. I've sort of, as I was starting to dip my toes into doing content on stream that wasn't speedrunning, I started to share some casual playthroughs of puzzle games. And just based on my history of speedrunning and my love of puzzle games, people had recommended to me La Mulana as a game that I might be interested in checking out. And so I played it casually on stream. I fell in love with it. And since then, it's just been a passion of mine, I guess. I don't know any other way to put it. I'm a huge fan, probably my number one favorite game of all time at this point. It's a big part of my life, I would say. And
still streams it. So if you tune into an authorblues stream, there's a possibility you still may see some form of La Mulana at some point.
Yeah, these days I still do. Typically, I just joke around and call it Saturday morning cartoons. I'll usually do like a Saturday morning La Mulana randomizer, probably at least 1 a week. So...
you mentioned it. Isn't a seed, to generate a seed takes a little bit of time in that game because of how complex the randomizer and how many different things you can randomize?
So there's a lot of different approaches to writing a randomizer. You can sort of take a number of logical approaches that I think make sense. So I guess there's really two main ways to think about how to design a randomizer, and there's others in between. But the two main ways to make a randomizer is either you start with just like some small set of places you can check in the game, and you add an item and you see what new places you can check, and you build out the seed from there. Or you do the opposite thing, which is where you just shuffle up the entire randomizer. You put everything in a random spot, and then you check, can this be completed? Right. And if not, you just start over again. And the La Mulana randomizer does that second thing. So it just puts everything in a random spot, and it says, could someone beat this? And if the answer is no, it throws it in the trash and starts again.
Oh, man.
And so it can take tens, hundreds of thousands of seeds to finally generate one. And depending on how good your computer is, most of the time a seed will take all of a minute, 2 minutes to generate. But I've definitely had some bad ones where it's taken 30 minutes to finally get one spit out.
Totally. They're fun to watch too, because it's always a different thing to watch every time. I haven't played through it myself, which I know that's part of the fun of the randomizers, to play through it and get a new experience every time. But watching it's just as fun because you don't know what's going to happen. You really don't.
Yeah.
So here's a question. So I'm not sure if this other people share this experience, but I actually listened to you on your podcast, and that's actually how I discovered your stream. That's how I had found you first. And I am one of the great things about what you guys did on the Frame Savers was taking these deep dives into video games and speed running and all that kind of stuff. And I'm curious if any of that, when you were doing the podcast, those deep dives, did any of that impact your gaming or speed running or anything like that? Was there any sort of like crossover into the actual gaming side of things for you personally?
So I think at the start of it, sort of what I was bringing to the table for that podcast was my already fairly broad knowledge of video games and speedrunning. And so at first I would say that it probably didn't impact me all that much, but over time, as we started to work through my backlog and his backlog, we eventually got to the point where we were running into games that neither of us really knew. And so I had to start finding new games and playing new games. And I think, occasionally I would have to play through a game casually to be able to talk about it on the podcast.
Right.
And I would say maybe that played a role in my eventual, branching out and doing non-speedrunning related things on stream, is feeling confident doing casual playthroughs on stream, or even just the desire to find more stuff. That did contribute for a long time to me finding new games to speedrun.
No, totally. And I think I'm always curious about discovery. We started off, I think this might even be before we started, about like, how do you go about discovering a new game? One of the things I hear so often that's come up to the podcast is that like, oh man, I never know what game to choose next or how to choose a game. And I'm curious, like, one, how did you, what's your I mean, we kind of talked a little bit about it, but I mean, even today, how do you go about discovering new games and finding new games?
So I'm fairly in touch with retro history media. So I follow a lot of YouTube channels that talk about old video games. And I follow things that way. So sometimes I'll get games introduced to me that way. Sometimes I'll go scouring speedrun.com for games I've never heard of. I follow a Twitter account that posts new world records from speedrun.com. And so I'll see the names of games I've never heard of and I'll look into them. At this point, it's kind of a self-sustaining system anyway, because typically, if other people see games that they think I'll be interested in, they'll bring them to me. Or Cuso Grande introduces me to a lot of games that I've never heard of that are of varying quality. I don't know. I guess it's hard because I don't have like one specific funnel that's just coming at me. But I do have a lot of different spaces that I explore that introduced me to games I've never heard of. Speedrun.com, if there's a game out there, someone's probably done speedrun of it. I wouldn't necessarily call it a podcast, but I do a show now called Speed Bump with a friend of mine, Smite, where every month we pick a new game, and whoever has the world record for it at the end of the month gets actually money. So we have a little community of people who are always working on the games, and so he and me and Smite will do research to find new games for that. That's a fun sort of speedrunning adjacent thing that I still get to participate in. It's not that I don't do speedruns anymore. I mean, I'm doing randomizers, which are sort of speedrunning adjacent, and I have been running a variety of games. If I come across a game that interests me, I may put a little bit of work into speedrunning it. I did Super Mario 3D World quite recently. I learned the 380 star speedrun. That was a lot of fun. So I'm still doing it, but I guess I would consider myself more of a variety streamer now. I've branched out quite a bit more, which, to answer the question about discovery now, I had I guess it's been almost 7 years I've been speedrunning. Wow. I had the last 7 years where my only interaction with video games was through the lens of speedrunning. If I couldn't speedrun it, I didn't want to play it. So I've got a backlog of like 7 years of games that I just kind of said, I'll get to it eventually. And I never got around to it. And now I'm playing through them and having a great time.
I can't remember. It was at some event you and I had a chat, and you and I kind of have a similar approach where we don't really care that much about, and I don't want to tell me if I'm wrong, but we don't care so much about owning the physical copy of a game, but we do enjoy playing it on old consoles. EverDrives have been like a godsend, if you will. I'm noticing the consoles in your video screen here. Is there a console that you'd like to dig more in, or that you haven't you'd like to spend more time with?
Oh, that's tough. So my problem with most consoles is that the specific consoles that I haven't tapped into are usually because the range of games that they have are ones that don't necessarily interest me. Like, for instance, a lot of the TurboGrafx 16 library are the sorts of games I'm not terribly interested in, which is fine. They're different things for different people, but that's probably. I'm not looking to dig into TurboGrafx 16. In terms of like consoles that I haven't really dug into a lot that I think would be really interesting, I'd love to explore more of like the Master System library. I love the old 8-bit consoles. They tended to have a lot of games that do appeal to me, the adventure or platformer genre. But Master System is sort of a completely blind spot for me.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree.
Sega Genesis. I mean, I've played a bunch of Sega Genesis games, and every time I find a new game that I'd never heard of, it usually turns out to be fantastic. GameCube surprisingly has an amazing library that I just kind of completely overlooked for a period of time. Didn't really think there was much interesting going on there, and now that I go back to it, I realized how many great games there were for the GameCube. So.
CDI, that's it's interesting in the chat. CDI, that's the one I would love to dig into. That I have very little. All I know of is what I've seen you stream before on CDI.
Yeah, the only problem with the CDI is that you can kind of count on two hands the number of games that are worth playing on the CDI, and at this point, most of them I've played. I still have a promised playthrough of Zelda's Adventure that I never got around to. But once I played Zelda's Adventure, I think I've mostly made the rounds at the games I want to play. So.
Hobbit, that's a good. So I picked up actually Hobbit on GameCube after watching you play it, and I enjoyed it quite great. It was a really fun game to play. If you haven't played, well, you have played it, but those out in the podcast world who haven't played the Hobbit on GameCube, good game. Yeah. So this is really cool. So if you don't mind, I'd like to take this in just a little bit of a different turn to kind of start wrapping some of this stuff together. There's been some interesting things happening in our speedrunning community. And one of the things that I really appreciate about your presence in the community is that you have not been afraid to speak up on issues that have been affecting our community. And if you've been at all on Twitter or anywhere, you know that, the streaming in general, but also speedrunning, we're having kind of a watershed moment in our community. For better or for worse, I tend to think this is actually a good thing that we are learning to move forward as a community to create a space that is inclusive of all different types of people. I don't want to speak for you, but I assume we're like-minded on this because I've seen your tweets, and I think you and I have a similar mind on this. One of the episodes that I'm most proud of so far of the podcast is I did an episode on how to create an inclusive community. Enchantress of Number was the guest, and it's an important thing to me that we create spaces that people feel comfortable in. And if that's not, then you don't have to. If that's not important to you, then you don't have to be a part of our community. It's totally fine. It's like that's what it is. Recently, it's been coming up this thing about the speedrun.com leaderboards and how they work and who should be included and things like that. And I really appreciated your tweets and what you brought and how you articulated how you thought what the speedrun.com leaderboards represented. And maybe if you could just briefly kind of share your opinion on it and how you feel like what the speedrun.com leaderboards represent.
Yeah, I think the big discussion that's been going on right now is whether or not, people who have been accused of, heinous things, whether or not they deserve a spot on the leaderboards. And there's really two main mindsets. There's the mindset that the leaderboard for a video game is some sort of sacred, untouchable tome of information in which to remove something of it is akin to blacklist it from existence.
Right.
It no longer... to delete it from reality. And then there's sort of the other viewpoint of that a speedrun leaderboard is sort of indicative of what the community represents and what it shows. And I think that debate is actually worth having. I think that while I am firmly in one side of that debate at this point, I do understand the notion on the other side because, a person can do horrible things and can still have contributed to the overall information available in the world, right? Mm-hmm. That by them not being a good person, that does not cease to make them having beat a game in under 15 minutes or something like that. And so the argument here really comes down to, does the leaderboard have to reflect that? Does the leaderboard have a responsibility to have that information? Damn the consequences. And I think it wasn't long ago that I was kind of on the fence about this one. It really wasn't that long ago that I said, well, I think that, if someone does something terrible that they shouldn't be in the community anymore. But, what happens if this person is, for instance, all these hypotheticals, but what if this person was the only person to have ever done a speedrun of this? Are we really willing to lose the only recorded information on this speedrun? And the reality is that that's simply not the way it works. Mm-hmm. If someone is deplatformed as it is and taken off of a leaderboard, that video will still be somewhere. Some leaderboards have taken the approach of figuring out ways to de-identify those videos, to anonymize them by not posting the person's name on the leaderboard, by putting some disclaimer that we don't stand behind their views, but we want to keep this information here as a historical ledger. Even going so far as some communities have said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to take the video and we're going to just crop out the game feed and we're going to re-upload it and use that. And however different communities go about approaching it, I support each community to take their own approach to it. Even communities who go as far as to say, we'd rather keep the information up there. I'm sure that they have a good reason for that viewpoint. But I think that the right answer is to protect the community, be it specifically the victims, or to create a space that communicates to people that sort of behavior isn't tolerated. And if the end result for that is that the #1 time on the leaderboard says anonymous next to it, or that the actual world record isn't even available on the leaderboard, that information's still out there. If some rando, gets the world record in a game and they're a terrible human being and we don't put them on the leaderboard, that video is still out there on the internet, and someone who wants to learn that information can go watch that video to learn the strategies available in that video game. And if someone wants to know what the actual world record is, that information is available on the internet. Speedrun.com is not the only home for information about speedrunning. But I think that there is a responsibility to protect victims. I think that it's easy to say, when you're not affected by it, it's easy to say, oh, well, I don't agree with that person, but they did really good at GoldenEye. So, maybe they deserve to be on the leaderboard. But I think that discounts the reality that, people who are victims of abuse, especially if they're within the same community, constantly being confronted by seeing that person everywhere they turn, realizing that that everyone in the community that they interact with is consciously making the choice of whether or not to support you or support the other person, because you can't support them both in reality. I think that's just, it creates a hostile environment in the end. And so while I respect everyone's right to do whatever they want to do, every community to handle the situation however they think is best, I think that the right answer is ultimately to create a space that you would want to participate in. If the space you want to cultivate is one that encourages all sorts of people to participate, and you want to create a space that feels welcoming, then there's one way to accomplish that. And if you want to create a space in which the only metric for, being valued is your skill at a video game, you can create that space too. But you are tacitly communicating that information one way or another.
And I gotta be honest, I thanks to your comments, that's kind of that's how I got to how I got to feeling about it as well. My initial thought, actually, interestingly enough, was that, well, you can't just erase or ignore something that's happened in the development of a speedrun somewhere. And this doesn't do that. This isn't actually that. When you take a name or something like that off of the leaderboard, it doesn't do that. What it's doing is saying that this, and I mentioned this earlier on, this is how do we want our community, if we want this to be a welcoming space, which I personally do, and I think a lot of the members of the majority of us want that as well. This is how you do so, and you have to make it a place where people don't feel like they're afraid to, there's not traumatized by submitting a time on a leaderboard.
Exactly.
And I really respect that. One of the things you don't seem afraid to speak out on certain things that are happening within the speedrunning community. And I has that something that's been developed, or have you kind of always lived your life kind of like that? Because I first of all applaud it, but secondly, for a lot of us, like I never feel like I can articulate my thoughts as clearly as you can in a tweet. That's why I struggle to tweet something that seems relevant or that might actually benefit somebody.
I get a lot of anxiety about speaking out about these things. It's truly,
tough. It's tough.
I try to be outspoken. I try to use the fact that I know that I can be articulate. I know that I have a broad reach. I know that I have a lot of people who listen to me and consider me a valued member of the community. I try to use my voice to speak up about what I think the community can be and should be. It gives me a lot of anxiety to do that. Every single time I tweet something about some person who's come out, every single time I defend victims, every single time that I speak about the heinous actions that people have taken, I worry. It concerns me. Not because I think something necessarily is going to happen to me, but because it's anxiety inducing. But I know that it's the right thing to do, and I try to use the skills that I have do the right thing.
Well, I'm honestly thankful that you have, because, I'll be honest, the past month, and I spoke about this on my stream once, where I was like, man, we still have a lot of work to do as a community, I feel like, to make this truly a place where people feel comfortable doing what they do. But then I'm starting to put it in the broader context. We still have a lot of work to do as a society, as a world, It isn't something that is just affecting the speedrunning community or just affecting speedrunners. And I don't know, that doesn't make it any, or streamers, I mean, it doesn't make it any easier, but it's something that it's not just insulated to us here in the speedrunning community, I guess is what I'm getting at.
It's a house cleaning that's happening right now, and it can be very difficult, especially because I don't want to claim that there's any correlation, but it happens to be the case that many of the people who have had allegations against them have extremely large followings.
Right.
These are some of our most popular people in our community, and whether or not that there's a correlation between those or not, the reality is that a lot of these people who have had allegations against them are capable of actioning their community against others.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one of the real challenges, is figuring out how to do the right thing, how to remove these people who have caused, irredeemable harm to the community, how to remove them in such a way that, they don't in turn weaponize the internet back against victims. I have the shoulders to be able to handle a little bit of abuse on the internet, but, there are victims out there who have experienced very real trauma. I'm fortunate to have not experienced that trauma, but I can't imagine that I would have quite as strong of shoulders to carry that abuse, that harassment, if I had been the person who personally firsthand experienced that trauma.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Auth, because that's a really good point, that at this point right now, we're going through a cleaning of house, and I think that's a great way to describe it. But then my feelings, because every time especially now that I've seen victims of people who I've seen victims who are my friends, like these are people I actually know in real life, and it's become it's funny how that makes it so much more personal. It shouldn't, but it does, and it's a.
I mean, that was my turning point for the leaderboard discussion. I was always like, well, information's so important, and then one of my friends comes out, and I'm like, no, strike it all, get rid of it. I don't want them to have to experience this anymore. I want to take that pain from them.
Yes, exactly. Oh my gosh, could agree with you more. And so what I've decided, I guess, to do with my own platform, however small it may be, is that I'm not an expert in mental health and all these type of things, but what I think we can do for those of us who have a voice is to also, it's just as important to inspire the next generation to do the right thing, to your point. And so, with this podcast, I try to highlight the things that work and that are benefiting and that are of good value to the community. And I think that's kind of, everyone has their own approach. And I appreciate you have been critical with your voice and in all the right ways, because I also feel that one thing you do that is important for all of us to remember, but is not always easy to practice, is the empathy you practice. You mentioned it, how you can understand the other side of the speedrun leaderboard discussion, and having that empathy goes a very long way for making things better, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a necessary step for making, but I mean, I think it's not, I have no ulterior motives, but I think it's part of the debate process, is that you really have to meet people where they are. Like, I can't convince someone to see my side of things if I say everything you think is stupid and here's what you should think instead. But if I can meet people where they are,
Oh no! Author, you still with us? Is that my connection or his? No! Okay, I'm gonna call him right back. Hang on a sec, folks. Worst timing ever! Okay, let me see if I can call him right back. Hang on a sec. This happens on Discord. After like an hour on Discord, this is what happens. Author, you with us?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Okay, whew. Thought we lost you.
Do you have my webcam?
I do have your webcam. Everything is working great.
Okay. I could hear you perfectly fine. You just lost me, I guess. Oh
no! Was there a thought there you'd like to complete there before we move on? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that you have to be able to meet people where they are. It's if I can show someone, I felt the way that you do, and I need to show you what thought processes I went to get to where I am now, then maybe I can lead someone down that same path, right?
Absolutely. And, I appreciate you for bringing those points. And I think it's a good example of how we can contribute to a better community. Like, and it's not easy. It's not like some of us, like myself, I just don't feel comfortable about articulating a thought in a tweet. So that's not the platform for it. There's all different ways you can get involved and change things for the better if that's what you want to do. I guess.
You can be you don't have to necessarily go out and wield words. You can be a steward of good behavior. You can be inclusive and accommodating and help people and live by example, do the things that you want other people to do.
You cannot be an asshole. Who would have thought?
Yeah. That's always been an option on the table. Some people just didn't pick it.
Right. Holy cow. Okay, man. So let's start to wrap this thing up. Okay. $10 million question. If you want to be remembered for one game, what game would it be? Is it possible?
Honestly, it's probably Bubsy 3D.
Yes. Okay. Cool.
I just want people to give it a chance.
It's so great. I'm so glad. I'm so glad to hear that.
If it weren't that, it's probably some CDI game. Probably Wanda Gamelon.
Wanda Gamelon. Which, by the way, do you still submit that at all for GDQs or any other live events?
I don't have a working CDI anymore, so I haven't submitted it in a while.
Oh, okay.
But fortunately, I have Liz Star taking up the mantle.
I saw that she was streaming it.
Yeah, she's been learning the game, and I will do everything in my power to make sure that she gets her times down and she gets the run where it needs to be and she gets it submitted and gets it accepted, because I want to see that game at a GDQ.
Oh, same here. Like I don't. It's a no-brainer for me. Sharfers, working CDIs are a myth. Well, that might be true.
I had my old CDI and it was on its last leg, and then I bought a new CDI and it was pretty much dead on arrival, and tried to repair it and got it repaired, and then it broke again. And at this point, I think I'm just out of the CDI game. CDIs are a real mess. I think I'm just done.
That's a hint. Anytime I search on eBay, I tell you, there's not tested. It seems like there's way more that are not working that are actually working that are available.
Yeah, there's people who do repairs and refurbishments, and they don't charge a fortune, but like, it's a rare skill to have. You can if you want to get a CDI repaired, you're probably looking at paying someone like $200 to do it.
I'm sure. That sucks.
And people will pay it because there's really no other way to get those things up and running.
Nothing else you can do. Okay, so if people want to find you on the internet, people aren't familiar with you, where can people find you? Where do you stream? All that kind of stuff.
Twitch and Twitter, authorblues. You can find me on YouTube at authorblues as well. I put stream archives there for old stuff. Those are the places you can find me.
Okay, but how did I not ask this question? First of all, proper spelling, is the A capitalized in Authorblues? Like, how would you?
No.
Okay.
No, always lowercase a. All letters are lowercase. The only exception to that rule is if you're spelling it in all caps. I really don't care, but just don't capitalize the first letter by itself. Of
course, there's the lowercase a. The rest of it's capitalized. And is there any sort of origin story that you're willing to share about your screen name?
It's mostly embarrassing, but whatever. I don't care. When I was in high school, I had a lot of free time on my hands, and I really liked making these little comics that I would draw. The character that I drew to be the author insert was Mega Man, which is known as, it was Proto Man, which is known as Blues Man in Japan.
Yeah.
And so the author was Blues. That's the actual origin for my username. It's a really dumb origin, but even though that stopped being relevant, like 3 months after I picked that username, I've always just liked that username.
It's great. It's one of the best. It's a fantastic. Well, there you go. Okay, origin story. Awesome. Well, honestly, man, I feel very fortunate that I've had a chance to meet you in real life and things like that. And I love your stream. Apparently, I have like thousands of channel points in your stream. Apparently, I might lurk your stream more than I do any other stream. Apparently, I don't know what the hell to do with those channel points, but they're there. So
just turn on emote only mode.
Emote only. Well, thank you so much for the time and for reliving some of these moments. And just going through, I think the community is better because you're a part of it. So thank you for everything, and I appreciate everything you do. And thanks so much for taking the time to be here. And
thank you. That's extremely high praise. It was very enjoyable. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks everyone for listening and watching. If you're enjoying the podcast, subscribe, leave a review. All those things go a long way to helping out the podcast. If you'd like to continue the conversation, I'm on Twitter @LatMackey, or you can also join the LatMackey Discord, where we have a sequence break channel. We talk about guests, we have questions. It's really interactive, really fun. Please feel free to stop on by. Thanks so much. See you in the next one.